Hey guys, so what I did for this video is survey the players in the Tenpai Dragon Duelist groups on Facebook and Discord just to get their thoughts in terms of the key strengths and weaknesses and much more about this deck. I've been doing these kind of survey videos for different meta strategies over the last few months. You can go check those out. Big thanks to the 29 players that did respond to this survey, and definitely check me out on Twitter so that you don't miss out on any future surveys. And as always, definitely go check out my discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Sleeves as well as singles. I want to highlight that Tier 0 games, they do have their pre-orders up for singles for Rarity Collection 2. You can use code AKUNA5 for 5% off there. And Card Brawlers, they also have their pre-orders up as well for Rarity Collection 2. Again, use code AKUNA5 for 5% off. Anyways, let's just get into the results of this video. The first question is, the pilots rating the difficulty of this deck, and it's funny, it actually averaged out to 4.1, which I believe is the lowest score I've ever seen in all the decks that I've surveyed. I think maybe it's not too much of a surprise because a lot of players do mention how linear this deck can be. Now, in terms of the consistency of the deck, they rated as an average of 7.8. Not incredibly consistent. I think part of that is probably because, while they do have a lot of non-engine space, sometimes they can also brick on like the non-engine space. And not to mention, to be able to actually break the opponent's board and OTK, you definitely need some help with the non-engine cards, along with at least having like, your one card starter combo to OTK. But sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. In terms of how they would categorize this deck in terms of tiers. So you know what, I was kind of surprised that a huge chunk actually still would categorize this deck as tier 2. From a regional level standpoint, it's actually got the second most tops after Snake Eye. From a YCS standpoint, it's definitely catching up as well, at least in terms of the second place. But I guess perhaps players were a little bit modest and not really putting it at all at tier 1. Now, in terms of the key strengths of this deck, the first one is something that I kind of alluded to earlier, just the one card combos. Definitely kind of something like, let's say like Centurion is another example where they have like a very compact small engine and they can fit a lot of non-engine because of that, because one card can get you so much in decks like these. Also ability to OTK, of course, that's their main strength, and of course even under Prosperity they can do super duper damage and still OTK you, which is certainly insane and not something you see very often. Space for non-engine, we kind of talked about this, 20 to 22 cards that we're saying. I actually did a Tenpai decklist breakdown video with like OCG topping decklist before Tenpai came out for us, and you definitely saw a whole lot of hand traps being played, board breakers being played compared to other decks, even though we already had a lot of non-engine space really for a lot of the meta decks out there, especially compared to, let's say in the last couple of years. And then you also have something like the field spell that really forces the opponent to interact a little bit differently because of the kind of protection effect that it provides. And I'm not really sure that's like the best direction for Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of course, let's say something with like Gimmick Puppets, they're also getting a new field spell in Infinite Forbidden that also provides that kind of protection effect, which makes it a little bit iffy. Now, in terms of the deck's ability to go first, usually this is something that would be very high for any deck that I survey because, let's be real, most decks want to go first, but Tenpai Dragon's obviously the opposite, and being 3.8 on average in terms of its ability to go first, definitely the lowest score I've ever seen in the decks that I've surveyed. At the same time, of course, 9.5 in terms of being able to go second. That's by far definitely the best going second score that I've seen in terms of the decks that I've surveyed, because all in all, this is a going second deck. In terms of what the typical end board would be for Tenpai Dragons, now for any other deck that I usually survey where they actually want to go first, this is a little bit more straightforward, and they have a pretty impressive board. With Tenpai Dragons though, this is obviously a little bit weird because it's more so when they're forced to go first, and that's not what they want to do. But it looks like most responses, they just said, you know what, it's just going to be like the seal bounce and being able to special summon, but also relying on the non-engine that you draw, like hand traps. And assuming that this is also a post side where you are forced to go first, you might also put in some floodgates as well. That might also do it. In terms of the seal summon, it can also bounce, and they were saying, you can summon the Vajra, which will then bring back the Chandra, and so even when you're forced to go first, you at least have your monsters are going to be protected by battle, and also you have some quick effect synchro plays as well. Now, in terms of which hand traps played by the opponent is the most impactful against Tenpai Dragons, or another way to look at it is, which hand traps are actually pretty good to side against Tenpai Dragons. So this is kind of what it looked like. Ash actually came out number 1. I was expecting it to be Ogre, but you know what? They were saying Ash uncommon can be really, really devastating, especially in like the battle phase. Ogre is interesting because yes, on one hand, it can be very good on getting rid of that field spell, which is incredible and provides that protection effect I talked about, but they were actually saying that Ogre is a little bit overrated in this deck in terms of if they don't have to use their search effect with the field spell because they already have access to something that they need, then you know what, the field spell, they just can still just leave it on. They have that protection effect. It's not vulnerable to Ogre in that sense by not using the effect, and in that case, maybe not as good. You have something like Crow and even Bell. They mentioned about graveyard interruptions, especially against something like Biden, whether itself or its target can really prevent that OTK. Imperm, of course, is better than Valor, and also, of course, something like Nibiru and Valor, where they are restricted to main phase only. It's funny that actually comes up now a lot more just because they are so efficient in the battle phase, and that's where they do most of their stuff. You also have something like Shifter, which is funny because they were saying that, you know what, they even play Shifter themselves, but if the opponent plays it, especially when they least expect it, and not to mention if they actually have a strong board plus Shifter, because let's say it's a deck like, I don't know, Cashier or Flunder, where they can set up optimally under Shifter, then it's going to be actually pretty hard for Tenpai Dragons, and for the rest of the hand traps, not really that effective. In terms of the board breakers that are good against this deck, it's a little bit weird with this one, right? Because Tenpai Dragons actually want to go second. So it's, bear with me here. So for one, you know, the common theme you're going to notice is things that are actually board breakers, but also quick effects, so that it's also good going first. Those are really, really good against Tenpai Dragons. So you have something like, let's say, Tenpai, or rather Super Poly. Of course, they are Fire Dragons, being able to clear that, especially, again, being not only a quick effect, but also something you just can't even respond to, really can clear boards. Droplet is another one that not only negates, but it can also be used during the damage step because of its stat modification, which is kind of critical because they do actually have some effects during the damage step as well, which a lot of other cards can't really interact during that phase. You have something like Cosmic for the field spell, for example. Fenrir turns out it's actually a new addition I put in the survey response because I decided to just take out Book of Moon because I already have Book of Eclipse anyways, and looks like Fenrir on something like Biden can also be pretty strong. Book of Eclipse, again, it's a quick play, but just being able to flip things face down, not only would it prevent them from attacking you, but I guess it also stops from synchro plays as well. Yeah, something like Feather Dust or Lightning Storm, I guess, if you're the one going second against them. And then the other board breakers really not that good. I mean, you have something like, let's say, Lava Golem Sphere Mode. I'm assuming they like Seals Pass, so that's not really going to come up. And then finally, the Floodgates that are most impactful against Tenpai. So Skill Drain definitely comes out on top. So Snake Eye, I've seen some of the topping lists, they were playing Skill Drain on this side. Even though Snake Eye themselves are actually struggling against Skill Drain, I guess if you go first, set up some big bodies, being able to play Skill Drain should be actually much more detrimental to the opponent than yourself. Yeah, something like There Can Be Only One, they are Fire Dragons, so it's gonna hurt. Luckily, There Can Be Only One is at 1 thanks to the ban list, so at least you don't have to worry about it as much as before. D-Barrier is another very strong one because for multiple reasons. You know, they were actually saying a lot of the continuous kind of Floodgates, Tenpai Dragons are going to be playing Feather Duster, Lightning Storm, back removal either in the main or the side. So, you know, that's at least a little bit easier to deal with, but something lingering like D-Barrier, that's going to be pretty hard, especially, you know, something you can play in the battle phase as well. And calling Synchro is really strong, and D-Barrier also is actually quite good against a lot of the different strong decks right now. Like, let's say, for example, you have like Pearly, Xyz, Branded Fusion, Melodious Fusion, Voiceless Voice, Ritual, so it's actually pretty strong. So who knows, maybe they'll finally ban it, but it's definitely going to be useful right now. And they were saying, yes, this deck has like the Zealantis OTK line, but that really is very unreliable, as they were saying. You need a lot of bodies for that to actually work. So it looks like D-Barrier is actually quite good. You have something like Zombie World Anti-Spell. Zombie World's kind of interesting too, because, you know, basically decks that play, let's say, Branded Fusion or something that can tutor into Beatrice can usually play this by sending something like Banshee. So, you know, they are Fire Dragons and they need to be so, and Zombie World is going to change them to zombies, but I don't think this is really seeing much play. I think last year kind of saw a little bit. Where we saw it a lot was about a couple years ago, where when Dragon Link and Thunder were considered really strong decks, and it really shit on them. But for now, I don't think this is something you really have to worry about. Deck Lockdown has been pretty popular choice as well. It's a really strong Floodgate, but as I mentioned, something continuous, at least a little bit easier to deal with. Spellbound is kind of similar to D-Barrier as well. Spellbound in general is usually also good because it can be used going second as well. But against Tenpai Dragons, they're the one going second against you, so that part doesn't really come up. Grave, I guess, I don't know, I guess their synchros are all level 7 or higher. That's why Necro Valley, they do kind of tend to revive from the graveyard, but at the same time, it's funny, there was at least one list that topped, a Tenpai list that topped at YCS Rio that was playing Necro Valley in the side, presumably for when they go first, and then I'm sure as long as they have access to their own field spell, they can at least just get rid of Necro Valley very easily. You have something like the Fissure kind of Macrocosmos-like effect as well. We kind of talked a little bit about that with Shifter. And lastly, in terms of the weaknesses of this deck, as noted by the players, one is, you know, it's linear line and gameplay. Not all players will enjoy that. They want some kind of very interactive deck, right? And this is just not going to be that, at least not right now. I mean, for me personally, I'm not very good with like big brain combo decks. I'm just not able to pilot those decks optimally. So, you know, maybe for someone like me, something easy like this would work out and it'd be fine. Going first, of course, we've talked about it. It was rated as like 3.8 on average. Definitely, while it's not super, guaranteed win if you force them to go first or anything, but at the same time, it is definitely noticeably weaker. Drawing too much non-engine, I kind of alluded to this earlier in terms of brickiness, because sometimes, you are playing a lot of non-engine, you have very small actual core cards, and so you can very often, for example, just draw only hand traps, and sure, that will prevent your opponent from playing, but probably in the modern era, really, it'll probably prevent your opponent from playing for just like the one turn. If you have no other plays, it goes back to them. They're probably going to be able to do pretty well and just kind of take you out of the game there. Negation and damage steps. So, we kind of talked about, let's say, something like droplets, maybe even something like Solemn Strike, those kind of cards. There's not too many of them, though, but that can be very strong against this strategy. And then the last one is just the uncertainty of whether you're going first or second post side. I can relate to this because some of you might know I played Cyber Dragons for like 2.5 years straight, which is also a going second deck. So a lot of times once you, let's say, beat them game one, you're not really sure if they are going to force you to go first. So you try to side in some cards just in case, but it may not end up working out because they actually decide to just still go first anyways. For example, let's say with Tenpai Dragons, Heat Wave is one option in terms of if they were to go first. Of course, it's completely dead if you go second, but that's why hand traps can be a lot better because it is very flexible. It's gonna come up whether you go first or second. So, and as well as some of those quick play board breakers I talked about, Super Poly, which I don't think Tenpai Dragons really have the extra deck space for. What, let's say something like droplets or I don't know, Book of Eclipse. Like at least you have some of those quick play options out there nowadays as well to have a better flexibility in terms of going first or second because you don't really know what's going to happen, but that is part of a stressor that you do have to consider if you are going to pick up this deck. Anyways, guys, that was it for the breakdown of the survey results for Tenpai Dragons. Again, a big thanks to those that responded to the survey. Really appreciate your time in filling that out. Hopefully this was helpful for those of you who are trying to play against Tenpai and having a chance to win against them, and for those of you playing Tenpai Dragons, hopefully this was also kind of interesting to see what some of your fellow pilots think. But anyways, a huge thanks to all of you for watching. Big thanks to my Patreons and sponsors as always for the continued support, and well, take care, guys.